You're listening to Gateway to E-Commerce, a podcast by ClearSale. In this series, global e-commerce leaders discuss challenges, best practices, new tech, and secrets to success. And now your hosts, David and Sarah.
Welcome to today's episode of Gateway to E-Commerce podcast. I'm David Fletcher, Senior VP of Sales here at ClearSale, and joining me today is Sarah Zelenovsky. Sarah is our Director of Marketing here at ClearSale. Sarah, if you'd like to say hello.
Hi. Hey guys, happy to be here.
So today we're going to talk a little bit about Mexico. So while e-commerce brings international reach to merchants around the globe, it also brings challenges. So if you're thinking about e-commerce in Mexico, but you're not sure where to start, what to expect, or how to prepare, for example, maybe you don't speak Spanish, and for me personally, one of my issues, still working hard at that, but this episode will be able to help you. And helping us today better understand that market is Victor Islas. Victor is a country manager here at ClearSale. Victor, if you would, please say hello.
Hola, amigos. Hello, everyone. Very happy to be here. And well, I'm glad we are finally talking about a very interesting and dynamic market that is the Mexican one for the e-commerce.
Yeah, so true, so true. And some of the things we want to cover today is we're going to share some statistics e-commerce merchants should know about the Mexican market. We're going to talk about Mexican consumers. We're going to share some of the unique habits and expectations that they have when shopping online. We're going to talk a little bit about fraud. I know that might surprise you, but we're going to talk about fraud in Mexico. Although it's similar to the United States, it differs. And I think that's important to understand. So there are many things an e-commerce merchant can be doing to avoid fraud and to help increase their revenue in Mexico. And we're going to talk a lot about that. But let's start with the market itself. And Victor, this is a great opportunity for you to share with us some information as the market size, the market opportunities, what it looks like, and so forth. So if you would, please share with the audience a little bit about that.
Okay, yeah, for sure. So one interesting thing that we Mexicans tell each other is that probably Mexico is 5 years behind the US in terms of technology. So that is a great opportunity for merchants and companies who want to land in Mexico, because we are actually looking forward to accelerate our growth and our knowledge in technology. In terms of e-commerce, Mexico is one of the most important markets for e-commerce in Latin America. We're just behind Brazil. Brazil leads the e-commerce sales with 36.3% of the Latin American market, and Mexico is closing in with 24% of the market. One interesting fact, Mexican market is worth $10.1 billion in 2020. So it's becoming an interesting market. And the growth rate of the Mexican market of e-commerce sales is now 16%. And it exceeds Brazil's growth, that is 12%. So I think it's a very interesting combination of factors that make the Mexican market a very interesting point to invest and to start growing e-commerce if you have that in mind. One of the interesting facts of the Mexican market, the average revenue per user in the e-commerce in Mexico is $147. That is 10 times lower than the US, that is $1,568. So that is something you have to consider. This factor, I think it's interesting, especially if you consider that the average income of a Mexican is way lower, probably 10 times lower than the average salary of the US market.
That's a great point, Victor. I was actually going to ask you if you thought that was because of the difference in income per individual, or is it tied to the fact that the Mexican market is behind a little bit on the e-commerce side?
Yeah, I would say both things. It's a matter of maturity, but also there is a matter in the difference in income. Life in Mexico can be way cheaper than life in the US. if you go to the supermarket to buy food, it's going to be way cheaper than the US. Probably renting houses is also cheaper. So life in general is cheaper if you market in US dollars, but also is incomes. But I believe this growth that we're talking about, 16%, will actually increase the average revenue per user per year in the following years. I'm pretty confident on that. We have been watching how the Mexican market is growing, not only in the average revenue per user, but the number of people who are actually giving a try to e-commerce. Well, we have now the COVID and people staying at home, and this is creating a lot of changes in the market.
That's interesting. It's interesting to see that there is a market with lots of opportunity, but we also know that there are big challenges when talking about Mexico, and that people that are outside of Mexico, they usually don't realize that things are different, and sometimes they just go to the country unprepared. What are the bigger challenges that you see or considerations that you see for merchants when considering to expand to Mexico?
Well, Mexico has a lot of potential, but yeah, it has a lot of challenges. And the idea of this podcast is to share some of our insights and knowledge on entering a Mexican market. First of all, when we're talking about e-commerce, we should be talking about the low internet penetration. So there is, compared to the US and Europe, the penetration of internet is very low. Probably the phones, the mobile phones, are helping to manage, or is helping to have more penetration of e-commerce. But one of the other factors, and probably one of the most important ones, is that only 47% of the Mexican population has a bank account. So the penetration of banking is still really low, and that for sure is a big challenge for understanding the Mexican market. So when you're talking about the e-commerce in Mexico, you got to think about the convenience stores. So actually, the 7-Elevens and the corner shops have become an important part of actually collecting and being able to complete the circle of payments in the e-commerce. So there is still a big percent of the population that is going and paying in these convenience stores in order for them to receive their products. So that is important. And also the mentality of e-commerce shopping. We have numbers that say that 25% of the people actually prefer in-store experience, and 23% say they don't trust online shopping. I think this is very important because one of the things that makes the Mexican market very risky is the mistrust we have in new ways of shopping, and that is due to fraud, and the reason is typically Mexicans have to cancel their credit cards twice or 3 times per year because their credit cards have been cloned. So that is an important factor. And even though these cards may be cloned in a restaurant or in a physical store, they tend to mistrust online shopping. And that is a very interesting factor.
That's really interesting. We have some similar stuff with Brazil. On the fraud side, of course, not on the banking side, because Brazil has one of the most advanced banking system because of fraud in the past and because of high inflation. So, but I get what you're saying as being a Brazilian. We have some similarities as well. There is another thing that I find really interesting about the Mexican market is we have done a survey with 5 different countries, including Mexico, and we found out that for Mexicans specifically, they are really resentful markets. So for instance, if they have a transaction declined by a merchant, there is a 40% chance they are gonna post some negative comments on social media. If on the same, again, so sorry, Whitney. When looking at the impacts that we see of fraud and declines on the Mexican behavior, we see that 40% of Mexicans will post a negative comment on social media if they have a transaction decline. And about 50% of Mexicans, if they have a declined payment, they will never buy on that merchant again. So we see that it's a market with lots of challenges and also a resentful market, which makes merchants, they have to be more careful when dealing with customers on this market.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Mexicans tend to be resentful and to remember this kind of stuff. And this is a great risk and a great challenge, and of course, a great opportunity for merchants to grant the best experience in terms of approval rates. These may be very surprising to you, especially if you're based in the US or in Europe, where probably approval rates are around 95%. You may be surprised that in Mexico, probably average approval rates are around 50 or 55%. That means that 5 of every 10 people that try to shop online are being declined because of risk. So one of the interesting factors and challenges, the granting the best experience for customers, as you mentioned, Mexican shoppers may be kind of resentful. And one of the biggest challenges is that, and opportunities for the new merchants arriving to Mexican market, is actually approving more customers. You may be surprised, especially the US or in Europe, the average approval rate in Mexico is 50% compared to a 95, 96, 97% that the US market has. So 5 of every 10 people that want to do an online purchase are being declined because of fraud or because merchants are not having the right tools to identify good and bad customers. It is very normal that whenever I speak to customers or to merchants, that they are fighting and they are really suffering and struggling on increasing their approval rates above 55%, 60% approval rates. So that is mind-blowing, especially if you are not used to dealing with the Mexican market.
So Victor, let me ask you, in our experience that we've had together with ClearSale and working in the Mexican market, one of the biggest things that I quickly learned was there's a big difference between the banking process, the gateways and fraud prevention in Mexico. And I think this would be a great opportunity for you to share a little bit more information about that so that we can help our listeners better understand how different it really is in Mexico.
Yeah, for sure. If you're talking about e-commerce in Mexico, one of the biggest challenges and one of the biggest opportunities is in the banking system. As well, probably Sarah mentioned previously, in Brazil, there used to be a lot of fraud. And that is the situation in Mexico, where fraud was not only in e-commerce, but also in the physical world, right? So right now, the banking system in Mexico is really focused on preventing fraud in the physical stores. And they have brought really interesting mechanisms to prevent fraud for retailers. But in the case of e-commerce, they're still not mature enough. They don't have specific solutions for e-commerce merchants. So they don't fully understand what is the particularities and the needs of the e-commerce market. And they haven't come up with specific solutions for e-commerce. So what the e-commerce industry and merchants have been trying to do is trying to adapt their solutions and their checkout flows to the needs or to the solutions that are available in the market that are not always thought for e-commerce. So one of the things that you should be looking forward is to building a specific flow based on the actual solutions available by the banking system. One of the main factors is that typically banks penalize merchants for everything that they do. If they reimburse, they are penalizing. This may be surprising, but when you want to reimburse a transaction, it may take up to 30 days. So merchants are actually receiving chargebacks from orders that they reimbursed, but the banking system took 30 days to do the reimbursement. So there is a chargeback in this period, and that makes things complicated. So typically what we do and what we focus is on helping our customers and merchants to think about a specific flow that allows them to accept the more good customers they can, and actually preventing chargebacks. But it has become a very complex solution when you need to involve developing teams, and you need to be very well communicated with your bank, with your acquirer, with your fraud solution. And talking about that, one of the particularities and interesting things about the Mexican market is that typically Mexican merchants tend to be lazy. So they tend to use something that we call aggregators, that is our solutions like Mercado Pago or PayPal, which make life easier for them as merchants, as is all-in-one solution. And I think one of the great opportunities for new merchants is to try to find better solutions than the ones that are available. So if you come to the Mexican market, try to you will certainly be ahead of this local e-commerce if you start building your own solutions with an actual bank and your own anti-fraud solution, rather than having these aggregators that offer all-in-one solutions, but they tend to have approval rates around 50%, and that is very dangerous if you're an e-commerce, declining half of your purchases.
Yeah, no doubt. And Victor, that's interesting because of the fact that these banks are trying to basically protect themselves and the merchant by declining so many orders. It ties right into what Sarah shared earlier with the resentful market, in that if the buyer is declined, over 50% of them will never order from that merchant again. So it's so harmful to these merchants in your marketplace when this is happening.
Yeah, absolutely. That is one of the things that I try to talk to these merchants. And in Mexico, I see two different scenarios, and we see the top e-commerce, in which we can talk about Amazon, Walmart, Liverpool, that are merchants that are doing things in an amazing way. They have been working very hard in having their own fraud solution and having their own payment solution. These guys are approving over 85-90% of the purchase attempts, compared to the rest of the market that is only approving 50% of the purchase attempts. So that is a complete different scenario. And when I talk to them, I tend to tell them, hey, if you're declining the customer, you're losing not only the value of that purchase, but the customer lifetime value. And probably this customer will end up shopping in Walmart and in Amazon. So every investment you made in social media, in retargeting, remarketing, to bring this customer to your site, and then when he tries to purchase, you're declining him, you are investing to bring customers to Amazon and to Walmart and to Liverpool. So you're actually doing the job for them. So that is very helpful for them to understand why these e-commerce that have invested in a robust solution of fraud prevention and payments are actually growing more than the rest of the merchants.
Awesome.
So Victor, thank you for sharing all of this knowledge. It's really interesting to hear all of that. And being someone that moved from another country to the US, I saw with my eyes that there are many things that are different on the behavior of people when purchasing, depending on the country that they are. Are there any other aspects that you see that are really different in Mexico versus not only the US, but the rest of the world that you think that is important to highlight for the merchants?
Yeah, of course. Well, one of the most interesting facts whenever you arrive to the Mexican market is the payment methods. As we talked at the beginning, the banking penetration is low, and you will see that probably debit cards are way more used than credit cards. So we have a information that says that probably 84% of the purchases were have been done through debit card at some point, and credit card is way lower than that. That is something to consider. And one, as I mentioned at the beginning, there is different or alternative payment methods that have been very successful in the market. One of them is cash on delivery. Probably 67% of the people that have done a purchase have actually tried this method. This is a great method for starting and growing confidence with your customers. So typically they will ask an order in cash on delivery, and probably the second or third order, actually they will move to credit card or debit card once they have trust in this merchant. And the second one, and we talked about it in the beginning, was the convenience stores payment. So actually, this is, and when I talk to customers, I tend to tell them that they need to have an option, either cash on delivery or payment in convenience stores like 7-Eleven or different corner shops, because this will allow first-time shoppers to have this, to start gaining trust in the merchant. So I believe this is a must for the Mexican markets. And of course, they can always complement with e-wallets like PayPal Express Checkout that will actually help them to start building trust with the customer. As we saw, we have a very resentful market, but also a very loyal market. So whenever you're able to gain the trust of your shopper, you will have a very recurrent customer. And well, compared to that, the probably only 20% of the market considers themselves as a recurrent buyer, compared to the US that may go up to 70%. But this is a number that we will see an important growth in the following years.
Yes, Victor, that is so true. And it's funny that you mentioned that, because I can tell you firsthand, that's the American buyer mentality, are the subscriptions and that recurring purchase. And that's becoming more and more popular. And we haven't seen that in Mexico as much. So great information. So, moving on and talking about fraud, which we have a little bit of experience in, fraud can be somewhat similar between the US and Mexico, but there are definitely things that our fraud analysts look for in Mexico that is a little bit different. And I think it would be great for Victor, for you to share with our audience a little bit more information. I mean, these are great tips, and this is some insight that we can share, and it's based on experience. Because one of the things that we tell everyone as we're looking at other countries and we're talking about our merchants as they're moving into other regions, into other countries, it's different. And what that means is it's not a one size fits all. We don't create this algorithm and say, hey, here it is. Now we can prevent fraud all over the world. That's not accurate. It is different in every region. And for a number of different reasons, it is different. But I think this would be a great opportunity for you to share some of the tips there that our fraud analysts in Mexico are looking out for. Yeah,
for sure. The average chargeback rate in Mexico, and this is a report by Visa, is at 2.2%. If you compare to the 0.4% average chargeback rate in the US, that is a different story. And let's think it this way. If you're selling electronics, probably you have an 8% margin. So losing 2.2% in chargebacks goes directly and affects directly your margins. So that is a very important consideration that you should have in the Mexican market. So that explains a lot why merchants are being so cautious, and these payment aggregators are being so cautious, and they're giving 50% approval rates because they want to lower this 2.2% chargeback rate that we have in the market. So just to start giving some details, if you're really thinking about investing in Mexico and start operating here, well, there is some very particular factors that I'm going to mention that probably will help you understand and prevent fraud. That is, as you mentioned, David, one or our main expertise in the market, especially in Latin America. The first one is the lack of a second last name. Different to the US, in Mexico, people have and use their two last names, right? So the father's name and the mother's last name. So typically we tend to see that people that use two surnames transactions are safer than people that just use one last name, okay? Is be careful about the common last names such as Hernandez, Gonzalez, or Garcia that are very typical. So you have to watch these last names because they tend to be very common and they tend to be used by fraudsters. Of course, and this applies to Mexico specifically, watch out for recently created emails. So these tend to be, and watch out how these emails are built. This can tell you a lot about the nature of the transaction. Of course, we're seeing a lot of frequent purchases on high risk products. So typically in Mexico, the regulations are, and the legal and the prosecution are very low. So that is something very common that we see, high risk products being purchased one after another. And of course, this is the delivery addresses. This is very interesting and very important. In Mexico, you can see and you can understand fraud by understanding the delivery addresses. So this is something that every merchant should watch out. Also, the addresses tend to be very complicated. So there is some areas in the outside of the biggest cities that delivery addresses are very complicated. And typically these are high risk zones for the merchants. One of the other things that you should look out is the lack of purchase history. And of course, if you're building your anti-fraud solution in a collaborative system, this will help you to make better decisions. This is something important, and actually one of the factors that we help our customers is through collaboration that has been proved to be one of the most important factors on helping the whole industry to make better decisions, increasing sales and preventing fraud. And the last one is the watch out for the IP addresses that are located in different states from the billing and delivery addresses. This is something very common. And a funny story, I have run myself into different providers in social media, especially in Facebook, in Twitter, that they claim to have special discounts. These providers, they claim to have special deals or discount rates with different e-commerce. So they tell you that you just have to pay 50% of the actual cost of the product, and they will deliver it home. So this is a very challenging situation because you have fraudsters receiving money from outside and sending to different addresses. So that's more complicated for an anti-fraud solution to start identifying these fraudulent purchase patterns.
What is interesting here, it's like those are great tips, but we also always have to remember that it's not like black and white. These are alerts that we have to take in consideration, but we always have to go back to the false decline issue that we were mentioning before, that we cannot simply decline a transaction because they have one of or multiple of these factors. What we usually do here at ClearSale, we send them to manual review. So we have some analysts that are located in Mexico and specialize in the market to review these transactions and make the final decision. So these are great tips, but I always have to remember that we have to give an opportunity to any transaction. We always give a second chance for them to prove that they are legit.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's one of the things that happened, and I've spoken to people that have started working in Mexico and they come from the US, and they tend to, every transaction in Mexico seems to be risky, right? So compared to the US market, every transaction is riskier. If actually you look for the address in Google Maps and you see the house, probably all of you will be declining 80% of the transactions, right? All of them seem to be risky. But I strongly believe, and as you mentioned, Sarah, the keys for being successful in the Mexico and Latin American markets, one of them is not auto-declining. That is one of the biggest mistakes, because as we mentioned, probably all of the transactions may seem risky if you are coming from the US, right? The second one is using and leveraging on a collaborative system. So if you have your own data and you're working on it, that's great. But actually, if you want to excel, having a collaboration model in which you can share data and information with other merchants, you will have better results. And third, and as a consequence of not auto-declining, is using a manual review or a manual analysis team to check on these risky orders in order to try to actually save those who are rightful shoppers.
Victor, thank you so much for helping us out today and sharing some of these insights. So as we start to wrap up, I think it's important to remember that a fraud solution is critical for doing business in Mexico.
Absolutely.
Not only is it a crucial part of your business, but we have to be careful that you're not overzealous about preventing fraud, because that already exists. And that's why the false decline rates are so high. So legitimate buyers are getting swept up in the process, but they're getting turned off of your brand forever because of this high rate of false declines. And we already know the latest data has showed us false declines will grow to cost businesses $443 billion worldwide by 2021. Surprisingly, this vastly outweighs the losses from fraud itself. So this is a global problem that we need to really be focused on. So if you'd like to know more about preventing e-commerce fraud, please visit our website. We have so many resources available there for you to help you out in your e-commerce journey. Our website is www.clear.sale. If you have any questions or you'd like to suggest a topic that you'd like us to cover, please send us an email. You can reach us at podcast@clear.sale. Again, thank you for listening to the Gateway to E-commerce podcast, where global e-commerce leaders discuss the challenges, best practices, new technology, and secrets to success. Would love to have you subscribe to our podcast. You can subscribe to our podcast on Apple Podcast, Spotify, or Google Play. And of course, please leave us a review. We would love to get some feedback. We'd love to hear from you. Join us for our next episode, which is episode 4, where Denise and Sarah will continue to discuss e-commerce fraud. Sarah, thank you. Victor, muchas gracias por tu tiempo hoy.
Muchas gracias, amigo. That's a great Spanish.
Thank you.
That's a great Spanish.
And with that, we're signing off.
For more e-commerce insights, visit us on our website at clear.sale.